Leadership. One of the most important aspects of leadership is communication. And one of the most important aspects of communication is storytelling. That's why I'm so excited to mention the Stories with Traction course with you. In this course, you will learn how to be a great storyteller. I share concepts with you on how you can boost sales, enhance your internal communication and marketing, and create a vibrant company culture. If you're looking to build a story bank for your organization and utilize a framework to persuade more effectively, go check out the course in the show notes, the Stories with Traction course. Now, on to the podcast. Persuading people to take the actions we want can be hard. Our teams and clients are bombarded with thousands of messages every single day. But there is a way for you to get above the noise. Stories. This is the Stories with Traction podcast, and I'm your host, Matt Zaun. Join my guests and me as we unpack the power of storytelling. We'll talk about topics like leadership, sales, and marketing, all through the lens of strategic storytelling. Enjoy this episode. Failure can sting. Have you ever worked tirelessly on a project that you were passionate about, and at the end you felt like nothing good came of it? Anger can set in. What do we do with that intense frustration? How can we turn failure into fuel for growth? That'll be the main focus of this conversation. I'm excited because today I'm joined by Jacob Brown, who is a former NFL athlete turned entrepreneur, transformational speaker, and writer. He travels the globe speaking to corporations, colleges, and sports teams about how they can take their failure and turn it into fuel for growth. Welcome to the show, Jacob.
Matt, thank you for inviting me. I've been looking forward to this and looking forward to having a great conversation as well.
I appreciate your time. I know you're extremely busy, and I've seen a lot of your stuff over the last, I feel like it's been years, and I'm very impressed. I'm very impressed with just the level of engagement, with the level of inspiration and transformation that you bring when it comes to your trainings, when it comes to your workshops, keynotes. So I want to dive in and unpack all that. But I feel like we need to start where a lot of listeners' minds went to. We have to start with the NFL piece. So before we get to your time with the Oakland Raiders as well as the Pittsburgh Steelers, can you take us through almost like childhood? Like, did you always envision being in the NFL? At what point were you like, I'm going to be a professional athlete?
Yeah. So one thing a lot of people don't know is my family, the Brown family, small family from Bridgeport, Michigan. Which no one knows where that is, but a lot of people know where Frankenmuth are and Birch Run. Bridgeport is another small town, very close, right off a main highway. And in my family, three of my family members, myself, my Uncle Monty, and my younger brother Ike, all made it to the NFL. In fact, my Uncle Monty, who was about 12 years older than me, he actually played in 2 Super Bowls. He played for the Buffalo Bills 93-94 team, where they lost to the Dallas Cowboys for the 4th Super Bowl in a row. And then he played for the New England Patriots in the 96-97, where they lost to the Packers. So growing up, watching my Uncle Monty play football from high school to college to the NFL was something that obviously sparked something inside of me that said, I can do that too, right? Played quarterback my whole middle school, high school career. Central Michigan was the only school that did not want me to play quarterback. They wanted me to play wide receiver, and that transitioned to a wide receiver.
Wow.
Played that for 3 years, tore my ACL into my 3rd year, sat out my 4th year, came back my 5th year, and played under a gentleman named Brian Kelly, who was the head football coach for the LSU Tigers now, was the head football coach for the Notre Dame Irish, and for the last 10, almost 11 years. And he turned me into a tight end, which was a Gronk style tight end back in 2005. And I had a breakout season. I went down to Miami to train for the combine and for my pro day with Chris Carter. I was down in Miami training for 2.5 months with the legendary Chris Carter from the Minnesota Vikings. And during draft day, that's when a lot of things changed. And I was meant to go late rounds, and I ended up not going in the draft, but I was picked up by the Oakland Raiders as an undrafted free agent. And I went out there and spent minicamp with them. And shortly after minicamp, I was cut.
Wow.
Cut for what seemed to be the first time I had ever been cut from any sports team my whole life. And I was running routes next to Randy Moss, and Warren Sapp was on the other side of the ball, and Aaron Brooks was throwing me passes, and I'm wearing the number 19 jersey. I've got a Raiders helmet, and I've made it, right? I've made it at that point. But I didn't know shortly after I'd get cut and have to go home and find a job working in a CNC machine plant making $9 an hour. And that's when the humbling experience began. So
all right, so there's a lot to unpack with what you said.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I want to touch on a few points and then maybe debunk some myths regarding the NFL. So you mentioned your Uncle Monty. So clearly your uncle was a hero of yours, at least something to strive for. When you were cut, because a lot of times I see a lot of people, they go through failure and there's like a linking between almost like a shame and a guilt.
Yep.
So when you were cut, did you experience some element of shame where you so badly wanted to do this? Like this is part of your family, you're cut. Did you have to unpack elements of shame?
Absolutely. Shame, guilt, felt not good enough, felt like I let my family down, my friends down. From the time I was in middle school to high school to college, I had friends that were always backing me, always supporting me. They would come travel and watch me play. And, once I made it to the NFL and was cut, that's when I felt the first ounce of failure. And not just feeling that I failed, but felt as a failure as well, because my identity and everything that I had done up to that point as a 22-year-old young man revolved around football. That was my identity. That's who I believed that I was meant to be and to do. I believed that that was my purpose. So when I was cut, all of those dreams went away. And the shame, the guilt, the feeling of not good enough, all of those thoughts came. And I was depressed for about a month and a half before a wise old man told me I needed to get back on my feet and and start life again. So that's when things started to shift.
So it's interesting talking about those key words, right? Failure and success, because clearly you were a unbelievable success just to even walk on that field, right? So let's put this in perspective for people. So just to train with other NFL athletes, what does that take? Let's take us through high school athletes, college, and then ultimately getting the NFL. I'm guessing it's very, very rare that even happens.
It's very rare. It's very rare to be a starter in your high school, to be quite honest. And a lot of people take that stuff for granted. Very rare to get a college scholarship to go play collegiate sports. A lot of people take that for granted because, the percentages from high school to college are 1 in 1,000. The percentages from college to the NFL are 1 in 70,000. You are teetering a fine line to make it to that next level. And those who do make it to the next level of any sport it's an accomplishment. It's very rare. And there is a big difference between those that make it and don't make it. And that big difference is what your mindset is, right?
Sure.
What is your mindset towards the game? What is your mindset towards yourself? And that's when it gets hard, when you finally get cut or when that sport goes away that you've tied so much of your mindset, so much of your time to, because you believe that you've wasted all that time. But that's one thing about failure is when you fail, it doesn't mean that the progress that you've made just goes away and you start from zero, right? And that's one reason why I mentioned failing forward. Failing forward for me came back in 2006 when I was getting ready to go to the NFL. I went and visited my aunt down in Atlanta, and she asked me what happens if football doesn't work out. And I said, well, football's going to work out. I've already got teams talking to me. And she says, well, what happens if it doesn't? And I told her, I said, well, I'll just fall back on what I was getting my degree in at the time, graphic and web design. She says, well, if you're going to fail or fall, always fall forward. And as soon as she said that, in football, we're taught when we get tackled to always fall forward. And the reason is because you gain the extra yards that you otherwise wouldn't have. And if you get tackled on the 1 yard line and you fall forward, what happens? You score a touchdown, right? So even though in your failure, you can still succeed if you fail forward. If you take the inertia, if you take the energy, take the knowledge and fall forward, you can still gain. And a lot of people believe once they start a business or they start a journey of weightlifting or losing weight or whatever it might be, and they fail, they believe that everything they have done before is just gone. It's not. It's not eliminated, right? That progress is still there. You've still gotten to that point, and you can still fail forward. You can take that knowledge, you can take that energy and that inertia that you built up to get to that point and use it for the next thing that you go after. So that's failing forward.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point, because I feel like success is so subjective, right? There's going to be people
Absolutely.
listening to this episode that they're unbelievably successful in business, and yet they still feel in areas inadequate, like they have an inferiority complex, like they're failures, but yet they may be at the peak of success in their industry. They may not be achieving the kind of goals that they want in the time that they're doing it, but it's so subjective, right? So you have tremendous grit. You were successful in college ball. You get on that NFL field. You're catching balls from great athletes that are doing extraordinary work in their field, and yet, okay, you get cut, but you're still very, very successful. You take that grit and then you start the process of applying it to the business space. I love that. I love that element of fail forward. So just to debunk a couple myths really quick, and then we can move on. This is more for my son, because my son listens to my podcast. So,
Nice.
so he's going to be listening to this. He obviously is very interested in sports and loves the idea of maybe doing something in the future. And he keeps talking about the NFL because we watch games on Sundays. So he's naturally interested. Okay. And just so you know, so when I was in high school, I did play football, and my high school football coach used to play in the NFL. He was a middle linebacker for the Washington Redskins. Okay. His name's Johnny
Nice.
Watson. Best coach I've ever had in my life. He was phenomenal. I mean, taught me so many, so I'm talking about business lessons. This guy taught me so many lessons.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing is, okay, he got to the Washington Redskins, but he wasn't making the kind of money that they're making now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he also had to battle an injury. He injured his arm very badly, tore his bicep muscle. So it was almost not useless, but very, very low strength of one of his arms. And he had to tell us to going from the NFL, then I believe he ended up working at UPS, and then from there became a teacher. And he's a phenomenal teacher, right? And he's taught, I don't even know how many students over the years, pouring into people's lives, making the community around him better. But he would always tell us the stats in the NFL, and like there's so few people that make that great flash type money, that he would always tell us about focusing on our studies, focusing on other elements in case the dreams of these high school football players didn't work out. So what kind of advice would you give to a young student that maybe they're showing some really good signs of being an athlete? What would you say to them regarding not to squash their dream, but at the same time, just so there's more clarity?
So I got this question not too long ago during a talk where a college football player stood up and he had to retire from college football because of an injury. And he said, how do you find your identity after football? And I told him the sooner that you can realize that you are not a football player, but you are a human being that plays football, and that your purpose is not just football, right? So a lot of kids, even as good as they are from middle school, high school, college, they believe that their purpose is playing football. And they believe that their purpose is to make it to the NFL. And they believe that their purpose is to make it to the NFL and make millions of dollars and do these dances after they score a touchdown and, play on Monday Night Football. And that's not their purpose. They might be talented. They might have a gift. They might be fast. They might be strong, But at the end of the day, the sooner they can figure out that they're not a football player, they're not a softball player, they're not a basketball player, but they just so happen to have that talent. But their purpose in life is something else. Now, they can use that sport to fulfill their purpose, right? Their purpose might be helping or supporting the poor, or helping people out of addiction, or helping people with their finances, or designing the next building that's going to be a skyscraper in downtown Chicago. That might be their purpose, but their avenue to get there could be the platform of football that will give them the spotlight to be able to fulfill their purpose, right? And one thing that I learned as soon as I was cut was I believed my identity was tied to football, but that was not my identity, right? There was so much more for me to do. At the end of the day, I'm a motivator. I was a leader. I had a lot of players and coaches even that followed me, that listened to my words, that understood my passion for people, because that was my purpose. And I even used that even throughout all of my football years. My purpose wasn't football. My purpose was to motivate and encourage people at the end of the day to do and go after dreams that they never otherwise would have done if they hadn't heard or shifted their mindset towards that. So
Wow.
make
That's
sure that your
powerful.
son, make sure your son understands what his passion and purpose is outside of football. And the sooner he can get to that, the even better player he will be, because he'll
Sure.
understand why he's using this platform.
Wow, I love that. I love that. You're a human being that plays football. That's
Yes.
awesome. And that can go so deep, doesn't it? Because even in business, we tie ourselves to what we're doing, right? Or how much we're selling or how much we're delivering for our clients. But in essence, we're human beings that are doing good within our space. We might be making a huge difference in the community. But back to your point about tying our identity into that, that's almost where the shame comes, right? Because
Yes.
when it falls, so to speak, that's the element of shame, because our identity is tied so heavily into that. So I really appreciate what you said. I want to talk about the up and down though. So you mentioned, so you get cut from the Oakland Raiders. Now you're getting paid not what you want to be getting paid, right?
Yeah,
A
absolutely.
lower wage job. But wasn't there a moment where you felt a little bit of hope as well? So you had another team, was it the Pittsburgh Steelers that was looking
Yes.
at you? Can you
Yep.
take us through that?
Yeah. So about 6 months, 6 to 8 months after being cut, I did get a new agent, and my agent got me a workout with the Pittsburgh Steelers, who just so happened to be my favorite football team of all time, even still today. I've always wanted to play for the Steelers. Always wanted to play specifically for Bill Cowher. And the day that the Steelers flew me out for my workout back in January of 2007, Bill Cowher retired that exact same day.
Wow.
And he actually did a press conference. So right after my workout, and I had a fantastic workout, I had a press conference. Bill Cowher had a press conference, and he retired that day. And then shortly after, Mike Tomlin was hired as the head coach. Well, Mike Tomlin decided to go with another player that year that was actually working out the same time I was, and that was the end of my football career. I basically gave up on the NFL after that, and gave up on my football dreams. And but yeah, there were some peaks and valleys, and there were some times where I thought, okay, I was cut from the Raiders, but there's still a chance, right? And there's also still a chance for me to play for a team that is my favorite team, right? Just so happens. So that started a pattern of what always seems perfect isn't always perfect, right? There are times where things look perfect for you, but you'll later find out that they weren't, right? And I've got to trust God's timing. I've got to trust his plan of whatever that might be. And it's probably better off that I did not play football. Looking back, I love sitting in my nice office right now, sitting behind a camera to speak to people, and speaking to people on stage is a lot safer, and I can play with my kids now. So you never know what type of injuries might happen um, while you're playing the game. So I'm very happy with where I am now.
Wow, that's so powerful. All right, so what always seems perfect isn't always perfect. That's really important for people to recognize.
Mhm.
So I recently had a gentleman on this podcast, Don Schmeka, and he made a comment to me that was fascinating. He said a lot of times people are so focused on the different tactics in their business and life that they're not focused on the ultimate strategy. And basically, there's so many people that there's this long-term vision and strategy, but yet we get so bogged down into the smaller tactics, right? And for you, I mean, you're helping and transforming thousands and thousands of lives now. So your reach is probably potentially even bigger than if you would have made this team, right? And
100%.
so I mean, and it stinks, doesn't it? Like it stings, but yet look at what you're doing now versus what you could have been doing, and it's incredible. Was the second blow worse, or do you think that because you were cut from the Oakland Raiders, it wasn't as much of a sting?
I would say the sting came the hardest from the Raiders.
Okay.
Yeah, the second blow, I was not numb to it, but I understood the business of the NFL, and I understand now that it's a business. And in the beginning, I believed, and a lot of players believe that they can just be really good and play really hard, and they'll make it. But that's not the truth, right? That's not even the truth in the business world, right? So it's not so much about who you know; it's all about who knows you, and
Wow.
it's the same thing within the business world. It's about who knows you and what impact you can make, and what other people believe in you.
Wow. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. So, what is something that you're currently working on now that you feel like because of this failure, because of everything you went through with you're working so hard, you reached a very high peak of success in the college world, and then you were cut. Is there something that you carry with you day in and day out that has transformed where you are right now based on this experience?
Yeah. Yeah. So I went through a long period of time of two different things, believing that I wasn't good enough because I was cut, because I failed, because I've had failed businesses or whatnot, in the beginning of my career. And I believed in my mind that I could not reach a certain potential or level of performance because of that, which was false. It was just false, a false narrative that I was feeding myself. I also went through that period of imposter syndrome, right? Everyone has imposter syndrome, but I went through a period where I was allowing myself to listen to that voice in the back of my head, which stopped me from applying for those jobs that I believed that I wanted to have. It stopped me from creating those businesses that I thought I had good ideas for. It stopped me from going after that promotion that I believed that I really deserved, right? So now that I'm on the other side and understand how life works, how the mind works, and how positive reinforcement and positive speak works for you, and manifestation also works. Now I teach other people to do that earlier than I learned it, right? And give them practical examples of how powerful the mind is and what we tell ourselves. One of my favorite quotes, you've probably seen me post it, is speak what you seek until you see what you've said. Right now, when I was in middle school and high school, my mom would tell me, "Hey, lay on your back before a football game. Close your eyes. Envision yourself throwing a touchdown. Envision yourself making the game-winning throw. Envision yourself making a game-winning tackle." And once I got into the game, those things would happen for me, and they came easy because I'd already seen myself and envisioned myself doing those things successfully before it happened. Right? This is where vision boards come from. People put together vision boards at the beginning of the year because they want to envision themselves achieving, attaining, or accomplishing certain goals or whatever it might be, right? And the reason is because once you trigger your mind to believe that you can have these things and you deserve these things, your body and your soul start to follow those as well, right? So envisioning, manifestation, those are things that I teach as well in some of my talks.
Yeah, so let's talk about the imposter syndrome that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
I find this fascinating. I've had the opportunity now to speak in almost every U.S. state, multiple companies, industries, a lot of decision makers,
Yeah.
CEOs, VPs. What's amazing is regardless of what level someone is success-wise, quote unquote, everyone has an inferiority complex in some way, shape, or form. I mean,
Yeah.
I've had the opportunity to meet with individuals that I've put on pedestals that I think that they're the peak top, and yet they still have some level of an inferiority complex. So I appreciate you
100%.
mentioning that imposter syndrome. So from the visualization perspective, I find this fascinating because you mentioned envisioning different things in sports. And I've read about a lot of athletes that do this. I mean, Michael Jordan, included. He would envision scoring again and again and again. And clearly he has a track record to back up that that works, right?
Absolutely.
But it's amazing how this doesn't correlate as much in business because people aren't grabbing a hold of it. I don't know if they find it silly or they think that it's almost like pointless. Like
Yeah.
you understand the importance, and everyone in the
Mhm.
sports world is under, at least the greats understand the importance. Why do you think that a lot of business leaders are unwilling to spend time visualizing?
Yeah, I believe that some business leaders, one thing I have noticed is that leaders that have played sports in the past understand the power of the mindset, the power of belief and believing things, and the will to win, willing yourself to do things and pushing yourself past that wall of pain to succeed and do things that you otherwise didn't think your body could even do. I do think leaders that played sports have an easier time accepting that type of talk and that type of thought process and those concepts, right? But those leaders that have not been in a situation where all they had to do, or all they could do, was depend on something higher than them, right? A lot of times, people had to depend on their abilities, their gifts, to get to where they are. So they don't really believe that there's something outside of themselves that can help push them, whether it's the universe, whether it's their God, whether it's their higher power, whatever it might be. They don't really believe that positive mindset can push them and can create things for them that otherwise wouldn't, indoors that otherwise wouldn't be there, right? That's my experience with it that I've noticed. I do notice that people that have played sports in the past, specifically at a higher level, do have an easier time understanding those concepts and also applying them, right?
Sure.
One example that I give during some of my talks is an example of these two doctors, these surgeons in Paris. They did a study on their patients after thoracic surgery. After this very invasive surgery, they would sit by the bedside of half of the patients and they let them know, hey, we've administered morphine into your IV. After about an hour, you shouldn't feel any pain. We're going to bring you back in about a month. We want you to report on your pain levels. The other patients, they did not sit by their bedside. They just simply administered the morphine into their IV and sent them home, right? After about a month, they brought back both sets of patients. The patients that they told reported almost no pain levels. The patients that they did not tell, that got the exact same morphine level, reported higher levels of pain. Now, why? Because what we're told and what we tell ourselves, our bodies tend to believe, our minds tend to believe. And if your mind doesn't know that there was something administered to stop your pain, it's not going to recruit the healing properties that can start healing your body. You've heard of the placebo effect, right? You've heard the placebo pill, the dummy pill. A lot of people believe that they're getting better. A lot of people believe that they're losing weight. A lot of people believe that they're gaining weight. A lot of people believe they deserve that job or whatever it might be. Therefore, it becomes a reality for them because your perspective is your reality, right? And that example of these doctors that tell these patients and don't tell these patients is a great example of how powerful our mindset is. That has nothing to do with sports, but has everything to do with science and chemistry and your body and how we can heal ourselves, right? Based on what we believe.
Sure. One of the things that just spoke to me while you're talking is, all right, so we've been talking a lot about sports, NFL,
Yeah,
and what's amazing is we are a society that's into prep. We prep for almost everything, but
absolutely.
it's interesting that in this specific instance, when it comes to business, we don't focus as much on the prep. So here's what I mean by that. I just started running again. I'm starting to get back in shape as much as I can. I need to make that more of a priority. Like we're all busy, right? But I have to
Same,
make that more of a
same.
priority. I wouldn't dream of not doing prep work because I don't want to injure myself, right? I need to stretch. I need to do some exercises before I run. If I were to paint a bedroom in my house
Hmm.
this upcoming weekend. I wouldn't dream of not putting stuff on the carpet and taping
Right.
stuff off, right? Because we're a society into prep work. But then when it comes to putting our minds in a position to succeed in business, there's no prep work. A lot of people find some of these exercises or some of these thoughts silly.
Hmm.
So what would you say? What's maybe one thing you would tell to a business leader that maybe an exercise they could do, like a mental exercise, or like the whole visualization piece? Should they be visualizing before going and presenting to their team? Like, what would you say from a prep work perspective, one thing that they could do to start the process of getting their mind aligned with where they want their reality to be?
Yeah. So one of my really good friends, Hodge Flemings, created a brand called the Modern Athlete. The modern athlete. And he describes the modern athlete as that entrepreneur, business owner, young professional that is going into the workplace. Now, just what you mentioned, how do you prepare yourself as though you're an athlete, right? If you're going to run a marathon, you're going to prepare, you're going to practice, you're going to run, you're going to eat, you're going to have a great nutrition package. If you're a football player, you're going to work out, you're going to prep, you're going to prepare for the game, right? How do you prepare for the game in the corporate world, right? A lot of that preparing for the game is exactly what you're talking about. What do you do in the morning before you start, right? How do you prepare your mind to have a successful day? How do you prepare your team to have a successful day? I've heard of those teams there where their boss comes in and just walks straight to his office. He doesn't stop and say hi to anyone, right? Doesn't high five anyone. He doesn't say anything, but then he expects them to perform as though they're just going to perform, right? One of my favorite quotes is if you take care of your people, the people take care of the business, and the business will take care of itself, right? That is prep work. What do you have to do in order to make sure your team feels seen, heard, loved, taken care of, right? And what do you have to do to make that sure that yourself feels seen, heard, loved, and taken care of, right? You have to do the prep work, whether it's meditation in the morning, whether it's positive reading, whether it's sharpening your blade, your mind, as you're during the rest. I talk a little bit about the rest and how even outside of sports, our bodies and our minds need rest. But it's not just sitting and watching Netflix or eating popcorn and drinking pop, right? It's what does that active rest look like when you're not actively pitching, when you're not actively putting together analytics or business plans? Like what does that active rest look like? Are you watching tutorials on YouTube that might better and sharpen your blade, your mind? Are you reading the books that you need to that might better prepare you to be a better leader when you do go back to work, right? What does your rest phase look like? That is the prep work that I do and that I coach other people to do as well, is what are you doing during your rest?
That's awesome. So you mentioned what you do coaching wise. Can you talk a little bit more about that? So your keynotes, your workshops, your coaching, what are some of the things that you focus on?
Yeah, a lot of the things that I focus on is doing the root work. I don't like to just paint makeup on a pig, right? What is it that's stopping you from being the leader that you really need to be? Whether it's your home life, whether it's your personal life, whether it's your habits that you might have, right? One of the things that I fell into is alcoholism. For a long period of time, alcoholism was destroying the way that I lived, breathed, treated my family, treated my colleagues, treated my employees. I was not the man that I wanted to be and needed to be because I was focused on the wrong things at the wrong times, right? I just celebrated 20 months of sobriety yesterday.
Wow.
And
Congratulations.
thank you. Thank you. And having a sober, very clear mind has helped me not only be a better leader and a coach and a speaker, but it's also helped me be a better husband, a father, and a colleague as well. So what is the root work that you have to do? Because there's always something that's stopping someone from going after their dreams, from leading their team the way they should, from starting the business, starting the book, whatever it might be. What is it that's stopping you? And I had to go back in my life to say, okay, where did this come from? Why did it start? What do I need to do in order to make amends? Or what do I need to do in order to change the trajectory of my life from this point on, instead of just stuffing the things that are from my past? Because a lot of times that's what it is.
Wow. That root work is so powerful, right? Because a
Yeah,
lot of times we like to throw band-aids on stuff in business, just
absolutely.
very surfacely. We got to get down to that root, the root causes. So thank you. I appreciate
Yeah.
that. And thank you so much for your time today. I very much appreciate your time. I have some big takeaways from this conversation. Okay. I know a lot of leaders probably got other takeaways, but I got three in particular that I'm going to be focusing on. I really appreciate what you said regarding identity. You had talked about you had worked so hard when it came to football, your time, your mindset, that because of that quote unquote downfall, so to speak, it led to that shame. And I love what you said. You're a human being that plays football, not allowing our identity to be tied up into other things that could lead to that shame. I love that. The second piece I took away was always fall forward, which I had heard that before, but the analogy that you mentioned about in football, you want to do that to gain that extra yard. And how does that correlate to where we are in business? How can we actually gain that extra yard through failure? I love that. And the third and final piece that I took away that really got me thinking about some areas in my business and my life is what always seems perfect isn't always perfect. I really
Absolutely.
appreciate that. There's profound wisdom in that because often when we think the stars align and it looks great, all the lights turn green and we're driving down the road, it doesn't always necessarily mean it's perfect for us. So I appreciate you mentioning that, Jacob. So again, I appreciate our time. If anyone listening to this wants to get more information on what you do, they're interested in one of your keynotes, your workshops, your coaching, where's the best place they can go to get that information?
Yeah, best place you can go is either follow me on LinkedIn, Jacob Brown on LinkedIn. Shouldn't be too hard to find me. You can follow me, connect with me there, or you can go to my website, which is failforwardbrown.com. That's failforwardbrown.com. There you can find all of my social media. You can follow me, connect with me, and reach out to me through my website. And I would be honored to speak and help empower and transform the minds of your team.
Perfect. I will include both those links in the show notes. People can just click and go to them. Thanks again, Jacob. I very much appreciate your time.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. And to all those that are listening, remember to fail forward.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. Please leave a review since positive reviews will make it easier for others to find this conversation. Next episode will launch on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Until then, remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.